Afternoon, everyone. Where's next? Thank you, Hayley and Colleen. Felt sure today we're going to see some Christmas jumpers, but maybe you'll come back with those at the end. So Maarten and I both spent a lot of time, as you heard, working in the future. If you work in the future, Deloitte gives you uniforms like these, so you can look alike and seamlessly pass through future worlds. So today is really about where's next. We're not going to talk about crazy technologies, about 3D printing hearts or neuroscience or what quantum computing means. It's really asking ourselves the questions about where's next and providing a framework thought process for you to take away and use in your organizations yourselves. Maarten is from our Center for the Edge. We talk a lot about edge and creating edges in business. So maybe before we start, Maarten, tell us a little bit about your philosophy here at the Center for the Edge.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Really great to be here. So what we see is that for decades, digital technology has both created great opportunities and progress, like technology has done so for the other industrial revolutions before that. And at the same time, it created the pace of change and pressure on the institutions as well as on the individual, which we will be focusing on today. And we are constantly challenged and exposed to new forces of change and disruption. And our mechanisms and basically also our DNA are basically not designed for that. So what we believe in is that we need a fundamental paradigm shift in the way we look at the relationship between the organization, the individual, and technology. And as a strategic think tank, that is what the Deloitte Center for the Edge is all about. We help senior executives make sense of and profit from the emerging opportunities on the edge of business, strategy, and technology. And we do that both with global research as well as applying that in more practical ways to organizations and institutions alike around the globe.
That's great. And building upon that research point, Maarten and I had the pleasure this summer in the middle of the pandemic, post-pandemic, working with our clients around the world, heads of talent, heads of HR, mobility and reward, really trying to propagate that long-term strategic thinking and asking where's next. So in that view, we're going to play some of those interview snippets for you throughout this kind of session as we go through the themes. So if you do hear some voices, it's not in your head or a ghost in the room. These are some of our client interviews, vignettes. Okay, if we play those.
In my view, we're not capable of making that transition to less movement of people. We need external people to challenge thinking if it's a big change happening in the industry.
10 years, what we have today will disappear. We start to see it with the new ways of working. It doesn't matter where you are. In 10 years, we will all be global citizens.
What's the biggest difference between now and 2030 for global mobility and reward? The companies who will win are those with cultures that allow them to focus on individuals rather than the verticals and the silos. It's a challenge for the bigger companies. Company cultures that focus on the individual win all the time.
We spent years building the institutional frameworks to operate en masse with a view to minimise risk and maximise compliance. Those things are important, but there is also a balance between that and flexibility, listening, and employee centricity. We've gone too far into a compliance culture and policy execution. What I've tried to do is ask ourselves, what is our purpose and what do we do? It's to make sure our business can thrive. We work in the grey and are excited about working in the grey.
And that last point, definitely working in the grey. I love that idea about being excited about that kind of grey kind of place. Maarten, why do you think it's important to have that long-term perspective?
Yeah, good question, Andy. I think I personally like also the aspect of purpose. And what we typically see, especially now with the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic going on, is that in times of stress, people tend to shorten their time horizon. We have to solve this right now. So that's everything that we're focused on. And at the same time, we see that everyone is looking for more perspective. Let's look beyond the crisis. What is key to that is that to have a clear directional long-term vision of what the world and the relevant industry will look like 10 to 15 years from now, the zoom out as we call it, is becoming even more important. Now we see this, let's say, increased complexity in our business world. And looking at shaping trends in terms of relevance and highest impact and reasons to believe they are true. So not on every trend, but only the shaping ones. And it is critically important thereby not to extrapolate the current, but to reason from the outside in. Get your inspiration from any kind of outside source to basically be inspired and understand and create this different view around what the future might look like. And if we have created this kind of, let's say, understanding of what this zoom out could look like, zoom in again on the next 6 to 12 months and identify and execute strategic choices that are founded on critical beliefs about that future. It's that balance of that long-term vision and that executionable agenda on the short term. And this both broadens the perspectives and opportunity space, and it is a much more activating and mobilizing narrative for growth going forward. Relating this to the topic of today, I think the question is on the table not about working from home or reskilling, for example. It's about what should work be from an individual perspective. So based on our work and research, mainly done by John Hagel, who will be also part of the sessions after this plenary session, most work is tightly specified, highly standardized, and routine-based. That has been the institutional success, but machines are so much better at exactly these tasks. They don't get distracted, sick, or make mistakes. So that maybe should never have been the work for humans to begin with. So we can now refocus the work around the potential of humans and make more impact. So let's look at the future of work through the lens of the employee and the individual for a change.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that view around looking through the individual, we're making a distinction because a lot of organizations will talk about, yes, we design around the employee experience, but that's within the employee experience within the confines of the institution, the processes, the mechanisms that exist today. We're flipping that orthodoxy slightly and saying where's next is really designing around the individual who will be engaging activities within that organization. So if we look towards work, first of all, and where's next, we asked again our colleagues around the world from different industries what their thoughts are about where's next.
There is a huge opportunity for innovation. How we manage a global workforce today versus 20 years ago is the same.
The mobility and reward profession of the future needs to have external scanning capability, really global talent scanning, knowledge of corporate and government relations, understand health and safety, etc. We need a truly intersectional solution.
The traditional movement of people is more about moving a person to a role. We want to do more moving the role to a person. People are also just not willing to move anymore. This trend started before COVID.
And that last point again, we're not talking about trends now, which is trends existed, but maybe accelerating trends, ones that will continue to persevere into the future. So what we heard from there was this kind of ability of rethinking work within an organization. So you could see things like roles, functions to roles, generalist kind of experts. Maarten, are organizations set up to kind of deal with this where next?
Yeah, it sounds logical, but the organization as I know it and how I see it is not necessarily designed for this. So we still think in careers and functions and yearly budget and review cycles. We are dominantly activity focused, not necessarily outcome focused. So it's a hard, basically, transition that we have to make. And like said in the previous, let's say, snippet, it has been going on for such a long time, and we've been basically so focused on our efficiency-based organizations that we forget that there is a fundamental change happening outside our industries, outside our businesses. So if we zoom out a bit, what we see is an increased trend of fragmentation and concentration in our economy, which also will convert to the workplace. People will increasingly turn to expert roles, and the trend of generalists will decrease and concentrate. I think technology will increasingly displace and replace traditional dull and repetitive work, and I think that's a good thing. And at the same time, that same technology will enhance and elevate the human capabilities. We always talk about the 3 Ds for automation in work: dull, dirty, and dangerous. And that kind of work will be replaced by a blend of artificial intelligence, robotics, extended reality, which basically means a combination of virtual reality and augmented reality. And with that, we see more opportunity for cultivating human capabilities like curiosity, imagination, creativity, and empathy. Passion will be at the heart of work going forward, I would say.
Yeah, I can see that. And that concept of experts replacing generalists, you could argue that some management layers were kind of made disappear, becoming slightly redundant. And then this world of hyper-specialization and skill acquisition, which is constant, how do you orchestrate a network of experts both within and outside an organization. Do you have any views on how companies may be doing that 10 years from now?
Yeah, the question is whether we should organize for it or whether they would organize themselves around it. So back to the idea of concentration and fragmentation. I think that indeed managers will increasingly be replaced by machines and digital technology, while experts will basically flourish connecting on platforms and through ecosystems enabled by that same kind of technology. But it will be basically at the heart of the individual, the expert that basically is looking for that connection that they want to make with either other experts or with people that are basically complementing them. We will see an integrated global networks of smaller ecosystems of experts. I'm pretty sure about that. And especially now we see that basically that is accelerating. And it is about scope and more challenge-based learning and not necessarily only about scale anymore. And again, if we zoom out, I would not be surprised that when looking for specific expertise or role or capability, in the future we will see suggested adverbs for people to connect with, to fulfill that kind of job and piece of work. Quite similar to what we now see with the Google adverbs based on your internet search, both for contingent workers but also for contract workers within the company. This will be the new earning models for contingent workers and the reward model for contract workers.
Yeah. You can definitely see that merging of the contingent workers and the full-time workers in this supply-demand matching type scenario. And things which we see in talent marketplaces today, which are somewhat external to the organization, used in sort of very binary ways, perhaps coming more front and center for individuals to organize themselves and clustering around certain projects and skills. If we move now to workplace, I'm looking forward there, where's next? Again, let's hear what our interviewees said around the world.
To humanize this as much as possible, what I hate is the one-size-fits-all. Anything that can make it more human is important.
The focus shifts away from business needs towards individual need and talent-driven model.
There are many factors driving away from the movement of people. I'm not sure it's sustainable from climate change, geopolitical and societal trends. When you look at those factors, the frantic movement becomes undesirable, unneeded, and we will find alternatives to achieve the outcomes we want.
So I think the essence of some of these, what we heard, is this ability to kind of rethink the workplace. And I think we always jump to the workplace as this sort of physical construct, as the things we need to kind of change, which there is some element of truth to that. But this cultural aspect as well. When you zoom out, what do you see? And more importantly, is this the opportunity now to kind of change, given that long-term perspective of how we think about cultures and mechanisms within organizations?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think that has always been on the table, but we didn't really feel an urge to apply that. I think we are currently at a crucial intersection where our response to digital opportunity is driven by what I call a sense and respond model. Due to our existence in a mixed version between digital and physical, and the current situation that has only amplified basically our understanding of that. And if I zoom out in 10 years from now, the majority of that will be completely seamless, intuitive and automated. So responding to emails will be highly automated, I think, in a way that we even don't realize it anymore. Quite similar to how we now are basically navigating our iPhones in a way that could not be imagined 10 years ago, just slightly after the introduction. The key is to accommodating for that and grasping that opportunity is that we need a systematic reset. So not upgrading our efficiency-based models with a sense of agile or more flexibility, but really systems and mechanisms that are designed to learn and become better, faster. And that's a quite different mindset, I would say. Also in the short term, we have, I think, especially now, an obligation as organizations to design for people to redefine work for themselves in the form of new behavioral mechanisms. Otherwise, the opportunity turns into a huge risk. And I am a positive guy, so I never want to basically leave this opportunity that this crisis brings with it to basically let that, let's say, on the table.
Yeah. And in terms of that opportunity, how can we create those mechanisms to work in this, on the one side is exponentially changing world, the thirst to learn. Is it about mechanisms or behaviors or mechanisms to change behaviors?
I think what we see typically is that if we want to change behavior, we have those cultural programs, and we're basically teaching people how to behave differently. I don't really believe that that is the way to do. And technology, especially digital technology, provides us with nudges and mechanisms that are much more, I would say, indirectly influencing behavior. So what we see is that the pressure on our employees is mounting as it is on the institution or our organization, but we pay far more attention to our businesses than to our people. Moreover, our systems have no mechanism for that relief. Similar to an example, and I used to work in that area for a long time, mobility. So I mean, let's say the mobility of cars and etc. Increasing mobility caused traffic jams and delays and incidents and even death. And due to the fact that the infrastructure is designed for the average demand, not necessarily the peak demand. And if we basically look at that, so what did we do? We switched to public transport as an alternative and to highly automated driving to get the human out of the loop. And I think that we need our version of public transport or autonomous driving for work in order to break the negative downward spiral of this increasing pressure and speed and complexity that we see with advanced technology to create a buffer for the human brain. I think that's a huge potential, but also there's a clear need to do that. Otherwise, we will never survive.
Yeah. I guess maybe picking up that analogy with sort of autonomous driving, sort of more the physical sort of sense, how do you see perhaps physical mechanisms as well changing within the workplace?
So if I look at the future workplace, it doesn't need less space. I think that's at least one of the common things that I see around. Everyone can basically decrease the number of square meters that we need for work. I think we will need alternative space, both location-wise, so proximity will be less important, also in relationship to that same kind of, let's say, emerging other kinds of technologies, like automated driving or virtual engagement, but also design-wise. Hybrid constructs need to be in place, so work and leisure need to be much more combined, more tailored to roles and the work related to core human capabilities, like I mentioned, creativity, imagination, curiosity, etc. And I think we will see real estate, for example, move away from the unifunctional space allocation to much more integrated space allocation, but again, much more fragmented. And I think that's where the expert versus generalist comes into play again.
Yeah. And that concept of the hybrid kind of workplace and what came out in some of those interviews as well, an accelerating trend around talent hubs. So they've been around in certain cities where certain talents of certain skill sets flock into centers of gravity. And one may see in the short term that they're sort of disappearing because of proximity. But in the long term, if human work is based on creativity, discursive, empathy, and innovation, then those become more critical. You can certainly see organizations now starting to rethink some of their geographical footprints, scenario planning based on future talent hubs around those kind of creative centers around the world. If we go to our final discussion then around workforce, again looking through the individual perspective and where next?
Simplify the complex for both the company's decision making and to make it less overwhelming for the employee.
People still want to experience different cultures, to bring different perspectives that will accelerate our work. We need diverse mindsets. Living their culture is different.
I'm excited about the behavioural profiling, etc. Funky stuff that doesn't happen today. And simply pressing a button to assess candidates, leadership styles, culture, etc. and it's already implemented. It's not just a nice to have, it's really value adding.
So some themes around there around technology, or the funky technology, shall we say. And this is the concept of technology and humans working together. And when I hear those words, things like funky technology, you get to this kind of technological noise in the system. How do we even start to kind of demystify it so we're not sort of just jumping from one shiny thing to the next shiny thing and thinking this is going to be the silver bullet that solves this kind of question?
That's a great question. For me, it's all about context. And I agree, there's a lot of shiny objects out there that everyone jumps onto and then hopes that basically they will find the silver bullet for the future. My main job is to help executives make sense of all the shiny bits and pieces that are surrounding us. That's basically one of the most important parts. And so they're basically taking a step back and basically looking at what actually matters. Not everything is disruptive. Only a few trends are actually shaping your world or your industry and the roles, etc. And those are the ones that you have to pay attention to. But indeed, we see that everything becomes information enabled, as we call it. And we'll probably see a move from, for example, text to visual, and see a future world dominated by mixed reality systems, so physical space, virtual space, augmented space, and extended space. And the first three, so physical, virtual, and augmented, are mainly, let's say, the real-time kind of situations. The last one, the extended space, I think is most interesting because that's where the predictive element comes into play. Based on pattern recognition, historical data, and self-learning algorithms. All quite technical, but all supporting basically the way we make decisions, the way we, let's say, create forward-looking learning systems. The main technologies that are relevant in this context, I think, are still the old, AI, so the augmented AIs for pattern recognition and mining of tons and tons of data to identify insights needed for better decision making. So I always remember this first example, I think, of the IBM Watson technology, where an oncologist at the Mayo Clinic in New York uses AIs to do 10 times more diagnosis on the same kind of time that they normally use, basically by enabling technologies that basically provides insights around everything that is being produced globally. Any seasoned technician can easily instruct 10 local technicians in the same time repairing or servicing advanced medical equipment, for example, using augmented or virtual reality. And if we blend all this with robotics, then we get humanoids. It's a little bit more fictional, but look up Chloe on the internet and you will find difficulty identifying her as not being human at first. I think that's where we are heading.
So my future work or data work, I'm going to be hanging out with Chloe here, this concept of humans and technology working together. Can you go a little bit further now, and how do you see our work looking like in this sort of human-tech collaboration?
Yeah, so let's go wild. So I think that's not necessarily too wild of an idea, is that laptops will be the new paper or the paper of the future. So the majority of what we do now on laptops will be augmented in some kind of a mixed reality solution. Adaptive work arrangements for roles based on wearable tech and sensing, I think we will see. Hyperconnectivity will keep accelerating, and humans will be the agents of the systems for sensing and actuation. We will not anymore be just the recipients of data and information, we will be the source of it. And that basically creates a huge difference in the way basically we put pressure on the way we operate, and our brains are basically pressured on. In expediting the future 10 to 15 years from now, it is always good also to look back. What didn't change and what did change? So this is again that sense making. 15 years ago we had no smartphones. So the iPod was just introduced, confusing everyone, at least me, with the new wheel that you had to spin in order to get to the right kind of music. I lived in Bangkok at the time and Google Maps did not work there. We were still buying music. That all changed, but in the same time cars are pretty much the same. We had laptops at that time, heavier, but still quite similar. And more importantly, social life was pretty much the same. So if we take that individual lens again, we as humans didn't change that much. Our environment changed, and we have to basically make that work in the future. So we have adapted to the technological revolution, but the information enablement and the fact that all domains have exploded, just think about the amount of emails sent and the images uploaded, posts shared, tweets sent, etc., has shifted the value space and subsequently requires a mindset shift as well.
Yeah. Certainly putting my laptop in my bag this morning is a big clunky thing. I did feel like a slight piece of paper of the future. And that concept I really like, we at the moment create lots of digital assets to sort of automate and help organizational processes and efficiency, productivity gains. But flipping that on its head as the human being the digital asset itself, creating that data, processing that data themselves, I think is a fascinating view of the future. If we sort of conclude and wrap this up, where you've been here in the Center for the Edge for the last sort of 7 years, any final thoughts on what we've learned or what we can use perhaps extrapolate against the next 7 years?
Yeah, good question. So I think when I look back, when I started at the Center for the Edge, everything was about technology. The first 2 years, I only get presentations on inspirational things around AI and 3D printing and IoT, Internet of Things, etc. And we've seen a very major shift along the years that I've been working there from the technology to the how. So how do we actually create and capture value out of the technology? And I always, let's say, show that it's very easy to spend a lot of money on technology and hope for this silver bullet like we discussed. It's very difficult to change the way we are organized, our processes, our structures, the way we look at people and the way we look at work. And that challenge, I think, is on the table. We have to really fundamentally rethink the way we organize ourselves in order to basically enable technology to work for us. So I would say we still need to keep creating perspective in the long run and let technology work for us. Look in areas that are now surfacing and start exploring. Be curious and creative and basically facilitate that. But do this separate from the core business in dedicated edges, like we like to call them. Edges have the potential, in our view, to become the new core business. But you need to fundamentally rethink the way you build that new business. When it comes to the metrics that you apply, the kind of governance structures that you use, the people that you have there. Especially want to pay attention to the governance. If you look at the typical, and also if we reflect a little bit maybe on Deloitte, in every company that I've worked with, the reward system is a very limiting barrier to actually change the way we look at the future and make that transition happen. And I think we need friction and urgency first, commitment and conviction second, to make an impact and transform. And we look and accommodate for meaningful work in the future. And ultimately, I think there's a big difference between change and transformation. I primarily focus on transformation because that's much more fundamental. And I think that's where the opportunity lies, Andy.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And especially on that reward point as well. I mean, it's there to encourage behaviors and cultures, right? And we just spent the last half an hour talking about how that's going to be key as we sort of think about where's next. So reimagining that, I think, would be the place to kind of start.